What if romantic love isn't the most important relationship in your life? Valentine's Day has come and gone just yesterday, but we're surrounded by the idea that finding the one is the ultimate goal. What if evolution tells a more complicated story? This week on Wild Connection, I sat down with evolutionary anthropologist Robin Dunbar to talk about pair bonding, the bodyguard hypothesis, gossip, social media. We went everywhere. And we talked about why romantic relationships may not be the single best predictor of your well-being, but instead, it could be your 5 closest relationships. If you've ever questioned whether we overemphasize romantic love, this conversation is for you. You're listening to Wild Connection, where every conversation is a journey into what it means to be part of this wild and complicated world. I'm your host, Dr. Jen, and I talk with scientists, authors, and changemakers about people, nature, and the surprising connections that tie us all together. Valentine's Day has come and gone, and whether you celebrate it quietly or roll your eyes, it sends a powerful cultural message. Romantic love is supposed to be the most important relationship in your life. But is it? Today, I'm joined by evolutionary anthropologist Robin Dunbar, emeritus professor of evolutionary psychology at the University of Oxford, and the scholar behind what many know as Dunbar's number. His work on the social brain has transformed how we understand friendship, bonding, and the architecture of human relationships. In this conversation, I begin with what feels almost like a confession, that I'm starting to question whether romantic relationships truly deserve to occupy the top spot in our hierarchy of importance. From there, we explore how humans sit evolutionarily between monogamy and polygamy, why pair bonding might function as protection in large social groups, and how men and women organize friendships in strikingly different ways. We unpack the so-called bodyguard hypothesis and even move into gossiping, where we reconsider gossip as social glue rather than moral failure. It's all about how you do it. We then close with examining why social media can give us the illusion of connection without the biological payoff. And eventually, we circle back to romantic love. Instead of asking who your soulmate is, maybe the better question would be, who are the 5 people who actually anchor your life? All right, let's get started. Robin, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's a great pleasure to be here.
I'm pretty thrilled because I've read a lot of your work while I was in grad school because I study social structure and mating systems. And one of the things I love to do before we dive into a lot of your work and some of the questions I have is letting the audience get a chance to know a little bit about you. And, your work covers anthropology, evolutionary psychology, primatology, cognitive science. But what brought you to integrate so many different perspectives and bring you on this journey you've had?
That's a very good question. I guess it goes back to the fact that I spent the first 20 years of my life in East Africa. So I was deeply immersed in wildlife. We just lived among it, as they were. And in those days, you could wander off into the bush as kids and just be in the middle of it all. And of course, you're also immersed in lots of different cultures, which makes it even more interesting. So I had this very early exposure, A, to a lot of animals, and B, to a lot of different kinds of cultures. That said, I wasn't greatly interested in wildlife per se. And when I went to university, I went to philosophy, to study philosophy. That's what I was really interested in. And I went to Oxford University. And at Oxford University, you can't do philosophy on its own. I had to do something else as a joint degree, and I chose psychology as the least bad option, which is probably just as well because it actually introduced me to the sciences. So our first year of lectures in psychology was actually given by Tinbergen. So it was all classical ethology, and a few lectures there from a very, very young Richard Dawkins, just come back to Oxford from a postdoc in the US. So we're dealing with history here. But what it did do is, it turned me from being somebody with a very strong humanities background into a scientist. And as part of that, we had to do in our third year a research project. And I was persuaded by a friend to do an overseas expedition, which Oxford did a lot of, undergraduate expeditions. And we went off to Ethiopia and studied baboons in the wild. And my goodness, I had never done this, following a group of baboons all day through the bush. And this was very exciting stuff, and I got completely hooked. So I went off and did my PhD on gelada, but we were sitting in the middle of a lot of other animals. So I did a lot of other animals as well as the gelada, and we ended up doing... Actually, I ended up spending more time later working on ungulates rather than primates, actually in the wild. So studying klipspringer, both in Ethiopia and in Kenya, but also feral goats on the west coast of Britain, the British Isles. So at that point, I was a dyed-in-the-wool behavioral ecologist who would descend to working on humans for good. It was only in the, let's say, it was kind of the late 80s. And I got, as my father would have said, my first proper job, the advanced age of 40. That's it. Permanent job as a lecturer at University College London in the anthropology department, because they wanted somebody to teach primates. Bob Martin had just left to go to Zurich, I think, and they wanted somebody to replace him teaching primate behavior and ecology. And so that's what I did. And I thought London would be an absolute... the richest place on earth for behavioral ecologists, and I discovered there weren't any in the whole of London, and I was on my own, so I had to do something. And the problem then, there was no money available. It was in time of big squeeze, and unless you were curing cancer, there was simply no research money. Period. I mean, particularly for all this trivial stuff, following monkeys and apes in the forest, for goodness sakes.
Yeah, this is resonating with me in my current situation, but continue.
Exactly. It hasn't changed. So I thought, what on earth do I do in London? And I thought, well, we just do on humans in the kind of parks and streets and cafes and what have you, what we were doing on monkeys in the wild. And so I started doing kind of observational studies of kind of mate choice strategies and behavior of various kinds. And that kind of opened up. I mean, that was one of those serendipitous events that happened probably only once in a lifetime, but it just opened up a whole new field of stuff for me, because out of that came really as a result of the kind of Machiavellian intelligence hypothesis, which Dick Byrne and Andy Whiten had just launched, and I knew them quite well. I'd known Andy when we were both graduate students together. I off the back of that, I discovered the social brain relationship, and all at the same time, tumbling out of that one discovery came Dunbar's number, the social function of language, and the bonding mechanisms built up from the endorphin system, and that sort of set me on a new road that kind of launched me kicking and screaming to studying humans, because of coming up with this prediction that human groups should be about 150 in size on the basis of their brain size. And I really couldn't believe it. So I spent an awful lot of time sitting in the library, combing through turgid ethnographies, looking for data on what natural human groups are. Because I thought that, the place to look is obviously hunter-gatherers. I mean, that's where it would have been designed to handle, as it were, that kind of society, and therefore what kind of groups do hunter-gatherers go on. And that just opened up a whole new career path. I've spent the last, 30 years desperately trying to get back to primates and constantly being dragged back into humans kicking and screaming.
Well, listen, if you want to come to the field in Uganda with mountain gorillas, you are most welcome. We can have
Thank
some
you.
nice time drawing up some interesting questions. Um,
Here's now life comes full circle because actually, before I went and did my PhD on gelada, I was offered the opportunity to go to Karasoke and study gorillas for my PhD. And I said, thank you very much. And I went away and thought about it. And I went, oh my goodness, they're enormous.
yes.
And the person I shared an office with, who was doing his PhD on monkeys in again Uganda, and he'd been out to Karasoke and had a look, and they'd ended up below the gorillas, and the male charged them.
Oh, yes.
And he described very graphically the fact that after a few yards, he realized the gorilla was not going to be able to stop. And the gorilla realized, as a big male, the gorilla realized he wasn't going to be able to stop either. So he had to throw it, and I thought, maybe not. Sadly wrote and said, no, I'm going to pass. And Alan Goodall then went in my stead.
Well, I'm telling you, it hasn't changed. I have had the experience of a big male. His name's Mahane, means big head. Misunderstand a situation.
Right.
And I would just say for the audience, if you are full on charged by a silverback gorilla who has misunderstood something and attributed you as the reason for the thing, it's you would curse the day you're born. That's all I can say. And it took quite a bit of time to settle down. And it was very interesting because you could see that moment when he realized, oh, they are not in fact responsible for this, and then just sat down as if
Right.
and tried to figure out what was
Going
really
on.
going
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
And all of us, there were 5 of us, were my heart started pounding now, just even, reliving it. But still, the invitation
Yeah.
is there.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's absolutely true in these contexts. The world literally stops and goes into slow motion. It's just like
Yeah.
watching a Disney cartoon.
Yeah, I ended up on my porter's back. I'm not sure how, but I was on him. And he had my stick, and I didn't know how that happened either. So we all were very animated for about 2 hours afterwards, reliving and replaying the experience. But we're safely ensconced in our homes. So
Yes.
at this moment,
We've lived to tell the tale.
we have, and the invitation stands. But
Thank you. And I hope you aren't going to be as tough as Dan Fossey was, because that was the other thing. She said, well, if you come and do a PhD with me, you are not allowed to have a radio. You may not listen to the radio in the outside world, and you may not have letters from home or write letters to home for the first 6 months. And I went, what? I mean, I didn't mind, couldn't care less, but I thought if that's what life under her tutelage is like, well, I think I'll go somewhere on my own.
One of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you in this particular week is because Valentine's Day is coming up. It's really not a holiday I appreciate, but I thought romantic love was the perfect place to start our conversation, because I'm almost embarrassed to say that I'm just starting to reconsider how really important romantic relationships are. And in the sense that,
confession time. Time.
What I mean is I'm questioning that they're the most important type of relationship, and potentially might be just a waste of energy. But that's a different track. But, I've studied animal behavior, mating systems. And it seems to me that mating bonds don't really predict stability or survival. In fact, they might go the opposite direction. culturally we act as if romantic love is the most important relationship that we have. And I know you've been mulling this over for a really long time. So do you think that romantic relationships are the most important relationship we can have?
Now she has me on a spot. The answer is, I suppose, like everything in science, the answer is yes and no, right? What's interesting about them is clearly we do have them, right? You have this kind of falling in love bit, and you get these fixations on a particular person. What's interesting in terms of the grand sweep of animal behavior, on the other hand, or at least let's say mammals in general, is that most mammals and most primates, by and large, are polygamous, probably. You get a few exceptions, which are monogamous, and most of those are obligate monogamous. Let's say they are essentially lifelong monogamous. I mean, the monogamous bonds can dissolve and animals move on, but by and large, really are till death us do part. And that was actually, funnily enough, one of the reasons I got interested in klipspringer, because klipspringer that I worked on quite a lot in Ethiopia in the 70s and then in Kenya in the 80s, are probably the most monogamous and pair bonded species you could ever imagine. They are constantly in each other, even by comparison with any of the other small miniature antelope, most of whom are kind of monogamous to some degree or another. Klipspringer are extremely loyal. If you see one, the other will be within 2 or 3 yards of it, always. They're never separated, which is what you often see in some of the other monogamous antelope, small monogamous antelope. So, and I suppose that's somewhat akin to what you see in species in primates like gibbons, where you have obligate monogamy, and I know owl monkeys, and some of the cebids, so the small monogamous cebids, where they're kind of fairly. The bonds are very tight and by and large last. I mean, there's no such thing as a pair bond that lasts forever in any species, I don't think, because various factors can intervene and cause a pair bond or a pair to divorce. The question is, where do humans lie in this grand scheme of things? And the conclusion I come to, thinking puzzling about what humans really do, is they are a pair bonded species, but they're not necessarily monogamous. Right. So and this kind of goes some way to explaining the rather odd fact that if you look at the kind of anatomical measures of mating systems, so relative testis size in males, 2D, 4D ratios, the second and fourth finger ratios, and that are good predictors on the whole of monogamy versus polygamy stroke promiscuity in primates, certainly. Humans sit bang in the middle, so they can't make up their minds, literally bang in the middle. And I think it's because we have been pushed progressively from a more polygamous mating system into a more pair-bonded monogamous mating system in the course of evolution, relatively recent, probably evolutionary history, in fact. And we aren't completely there yet. And that's why humans, then, if you look at the distribution of mating systems in humans, culture by culture, then the vast majority are actually polygamous. A few are polyandrous, not an enormous number, but there are, sort of a reasonable number that are polyandrous. So one girl is married to usually a bunch of brothers.
Right.
I don't think there's anybody that has tried. Well, they might have tried it, but clearly hasn't succeeded marrying one girl to a random bunch of blokes.
Oh,
well, you found one.
Well, yeah. So in my book, Wild Connection, one of the systems I found was in the Tibetan plateau. Now, I'm not sure that it's random blokes, but in that system, because land was passed to women,
yeah.
And it was so large, the land, that it needed more than one man to work the land. So they were permitted to marry at least two.
Yeah.
Whereas in the Vikings, I think it was, siblings, males,
Yeah.
brothers,
Yeah. In the Tibetans, they're marrying brothers.
Oh,
And
okay.
usually it's all
Oh,
the brothers bar one, and that's the second oldest,
okay.
which I think is very cunning because and what they did with the second oldest brother is they stuck him in a monastery to pray for the family. And earn credit and kudos with whoever the Almighty might be, and I thought that was really neat because it reduced mating conflict between the males, because at that point the oldest brother is clearly only going to be married when he's sexually active, but the younger ones are actually children
Oh,
and completely uninterested. And as they gradually mature, so the old one is gradually over the hump, and or the older ones get pushed over the hump and are less interested and are less bothered by
fascinating.
sexual jealousies. I think it's very, very clever. I mean,
Okay.
talk about parental manipulation of offspring. It's, to
All
a
right.
super high degree. The point is that by and large, polyandry is quite, and I'm told by the people who worked on Tibetan polyandry that women find it very, very hard going,
I'm sure.
managing these several males, because often there are 4 or 5 of them, or there can be as many as 4 or 5. But the majority are promiscuous, polygamous.
Yeah.
So it's one man and several wives. And monogamy is quite rare and tends to be economically enforced, in the sense that if you're, what is the polygamy threshold issue, isn't it? What's the point of being the second wife of a poor male? I mean,
Yeah.
the first wife is not going to let you have a fair share of whatever resources he's got to offer, that's for sure. So if you're going to be a second wife, you're going to want to marry a millionaire or the equivalent, right?
Yeah.
In order to have a fair share of it. And therefore, if you live in poor quality environments, as is the case often with hunter-gatherers, then you quite often seem to find, sort of informal monogamy
Yeah.
persistent. But often it's actually serial monogamy, because, the marriage dissolves after so many years, and they repair with somebody else. And the monogamy of the kind we have, is just state enforced.
Well, I would argue that probably very few relationships, even if they're legally structured into marriage, are not monogamous. So, right, there's
Yeah.
social monogamy,
Yep.
there's
Yep.
actual monogamy, and I think that just as many females are as promiscuous as males within bonded relationships.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
Well, it would be difficult for it to be otherwise.
Well, exactly. This has always been my point: is why do men think they're just being men? Who are they doing it with? But
Yes.
I
Yes.
digress.
Yes.
But the real, this really brings up for me, why are we always overemphasizing romantic monogamy in how we tell the human story? Like, why are we so hung up on romantic love and the soulmate and what is that?
Yeah. It's a good question, I think, actually, because despite everybody since Aristotle spending an inordinate amount of time puzzling about it, there really hasn't been a satisfactory explanation for why humans behave as they are. You see this. I mean, very often social anthropologists, cultural anthropologists will tell you, well, of course, all this romantic love stuff, it's a sort of invention of Western cultures, and in my tribal society, and it's always mine that's at issue for them. Marriages are arranged, and of course, we've had arranged marriages in Europe since time immemorial, probably, although it's usually the posh rich people that do it, rather than kings and queens, in other words, that have arranged, or nobility that have arranged marriages. Peasants, well, they do whatever they want to do down at the bottom of the
Right.
pile. But sometimes I kind of think, well, if you look at arranged marriages where they're common, let's say somewhere like India, and where they have been common since time immemorial, and to a large extent still are common, what people will often tell you is that an arranged marriage isn't a bar to a successful, happy marriage, because it's just a question of whether you fall in love with somebody before you get married or after you get married. And the question then is, well, do you really choose who you fall in love with, or are you in what I call the Mr. Darcy dilemma, or the girls are in the Mr. Darcy dilemma, that everybody has an ideal, right, as to the perfect romantic partner, and obviously the perfect romantic partner is handsome, rich, well-connected, etc., 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 and that describes perfectly Mr. Darcy in Jane Austen's beautifully acute observations of the foibles of human mating systems. And, everybody wants to marry Mr. Darcy, but unfortunately, A, Mr. Darcy has a choice, and B, there is only one of him. So one lucky girl is going to marry Mr. Darcy and sail off into the sunset, quote unquote, and be happy ever after, presumably, or that's the hope. What do the rest of you do? And the answer is, well, you go and marry the curate. The curate is boring, poor, no prospects, but he's better than nothing, right? It's better than the alternative. So at least in that particular context, you might say otherwise. But I think there is a sense in which, it's all very well having ideals in this context, and clearly that's a very good idea in order to get the best deal you can. But if your ideals are such that you end up not marrying and therefore not reproducing, from an evolutionary point of view, that's not terribly helpful. So the system has to be more flexible than that. And it's flexible in the sense that it's the conclusion I come to, in the sense that what it's really about is, can you pair bond with somebody, even if it's only temporarily, to the point where you can do the necessary evolutionary component, and you can leave it open as to whether that includes 40 years of childcare or not, but on the grounds that the first, those parents will often tell you it's the first 40 years are the worst.
Right.
And just to enable that to happen, you've got this sort of halfway house. I actually think it's a little bit more complicated than that. It's a kind of conclusion I've come to mulling over this, particularly over the last kind of decade or so, is that what you've actually had is a system in which, when you're living in very large groups like humans have been doing really since the appearance of Homo, so increasingly large groups over the last 2 million years, but especially so probably over the last 500,000 years, what you have is what I call Deakin's dilemma. You've got a whole bunch of males kicking around in the group. How do you get over the problem that you want to go hunting and you leave your darling wife alone in the village with all these young, fit young males? And the answer is, you have to have a pair bonded system. That was his answer. And I thought that was very perceptive. I mean, it's the only person who really thought about it. But I think it goes a bit further than that. And I think what the pair bonding process involves is actually females choosing a bodyguard. So I was completely. This is Susan. What's her name? Oh God, forgotten the name now. Bodyguard hypothesis, which she developed working on birds originally, and then she went off and worked on whales and said no more about it. But I thought it was very, very smart idea, and you do actually see it quite a lot on birds. I remember Steve Emlyn showing me his little bee eaters in Kenya and saying, they're pair bonded because they're living in these big groups in sandbanks. And if the females come out alone, they're just pounced on by all these loose males kicking around. So they basically need a bodyguard to handle it. So I think there's essentially what you see in humans is that, and that kind of explains why, in my observations, you tend to get much deeper bonding by women than by the men. Very focused and very much designed to make sure this sumo wrestler that you just managed to grab is going to stay around and keep the rest of them away from you. And it's back into the same. I think this, in fact, is virtually identical to the system you see in both Hamadryas and gelada baboons.
Well,
and it works because, as Hans Kummer pointed out or showed experimentally many, many years ago with his Hamadryas, is what drives the system, what prevents the males. He called it triadic differentiation or pair bond protection. Males from the group will not try to wrest a female from another male in the group, but the cues they're relying on to do that or not do that is their sense of how well bonded the female is to the male. So if they're paying close attention to him and watching him and following him as they do in Hamadryas, all the other males in the band will just sit there quietly. But if they get the impression that, she's constantly looking around and drifting off and doesn't seem terribly interested in her current male, then they pounce.
Well, yeah. So it's so interesting. I was like chomping at the bit to contribute to this because no, don't be sorry. Because what you just said, I agree. I hadn't heard about the bodyguard hypothesis, so I'm definitely going to go research it. Because one of the things that I use as my sort of marker for how attentive I am to a particular partner would be how reliable and consistent they are in, meeting whatever needs, right? Yep. And often that's feeling safe and protected, that, if I have an emergency, I can call you, I can count on you to help, show up, send somebody else to help, handle it. If I have to handle everything, then why are you here?
Yes. Exactly.
Like, for what? Right. Yeah. And so I remember Cher was interviewed once, do you think men are important? And she said, for what? And the more independent or strong or well-resourced, to me, I think a woman is in our sort of modern society, the more confusing it might be for some males, but also the more demanding it is for males to provide a protection in a different kind of way than maybe historically was needed. But I also am very acutely aware, even recently, about this sort of monitoring that other males do about how bonded you are. And as soon as they feel your attention shift, so I recently ended a relationship, and it was incredible how many males just came out of the woodwork,
suddenly turned up.
Yeah, and they wanted to escort me here or there, and they wanted to chat. They started messaging me constantly. Good morning, darling. I'm like, darling, when did I become the darling? This is unexpected. And and so, they had obviously been, even though I never communicated anything directly, it was observed, it was noted, and then the attention started flowing.
I'm impressed at how quickly the Bush Telegraph works. I mean, there's a interesting project there actually for somebody, because it's actually an extraordinary phenomenon. But I mean, just brings to it's Susan Mesnick, a bodyguard hypothesis that I was referring to. That's the person you want. So, and she only published one paper on it, I think, or maybe two. And it was done with Martin Daly's wife, one of them, because she collected data on humans to test it.
Okay.
But it just made so much sense to me. And it just seemed to explain so much of behavior, not just in humans, but also in these other primate species that live in these very big permanent bonded social groups. And what that's reflected in is that you have a polygamous mating system. So you get harems forming within the band. And they're being formed essentially by the females. It's not the male. I mean, okay, in Hamadryas, they do a lot of herding and stuff. Gelada, they don't. But even in Hamadryas, it's clear that the females are playing a long game. If they get herded, they kind of go, "Oh yeah," or sorry, beg your pardon, Your Honor. Beg your pardon, Your Honor, and then carry on doing what they want to do anyway. And it's particularly clear in Gelada because they treat the male in Gelada as though he was a female ally. I mean, it's the female which has the highest ranking female that doesn't have a female sibling or mother or daughter to pair with as a defensive alliance that latches herself onto the male. And the relationship in terms of grooming between the male and the female is very even. It's just what you would see in between two females. Whereas normally, in those sort of systems, the female would be grooming the male and the male would be drinking beer or something like that.
Well, we'll circle back to that if we have time on mountain gorillas or, post show notes. So, okay. So I love this idea of sort of how and why we've gotten so hung up on romantic love. But then, I'm thinking now, it's time to go off into the sunset on my own with a bunch of friends on a boat. And so do you think friendships are more important long term in terms of well-being? I don't know how we want to define that, right? But sort of stability or success. Are friendships more important ultimately than our romantic relationships?
Well, let's put it this way. Relationships are crucially important for your well-being. Some of those will indeed be friends, but some of them will be very close family, it turns out, and some of them presumably will be romantic partners. But the one thing that's kind of come out of the woodwork in the last decade and a half has been the extraordinary effect that number of relationships has on your psychological health, well-being, and your physical health, well-being. There's been an absolute tsunami of evidence come out of the medical literature over the last 15 years or so. The single best predictor of your psychological health, well-being, physical health, well-being, even how long you're going to live into the future, is the number of close friendships that you've got. And the optimum seems to be about 5. Now, some of those are made up out of family, close family. Some of them are made up out of true friendships. And we see much the same thing in a lot of the very social primates. So in baboons, your longevity, your fertility, et cetera, your ability, the speed with which wounds heal, all these kind of things are hugely affected by how social the females are. Females that have more friends, whether it doesn't really matter whether they're sisters or siblings or what, more grooming partners, the better off they perform, if you like. And this seems to be very true of humans.
Yeah.
Now, the question is, are romantic partners better in this context than conventional friends? And the answer is it sort of partly depends on who you are. So there's a big gender divide here. This is Joyce Benenson territory, very much. There's difference in social style between the two sexes. So one of the things we've shown is that obviously both sexes have romantic partners, right? In general, not all the time, but in general, they'll have a romantic partner. But what you'll often get, or very often get, it's not just often, with women, is a best friend forever, who is almost always female. So 85, at any given time, 85% of women in our surveys will have a best friend forever, and 85% of those will be another woman, and 15%, surprisingly, are a male. You kind of go, what? And this is all above board, and it's not not hidden hidden relationships.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is when we haven't done this particular bit, but when the social psychologists have asked women why they have a best friend forever, the standard response is because men are useless at emotion.
Hmm.
There is no point in having an emotion discussion or a discussion about an emotional issue with a bloke because you just get a blank stare. So you need somebody who can provide you with that outlet and provide you with kind of the support and advice and all these other kinds of things that a good relationship have. What's interesting is men don't have them. Yes, if you ask, have you got a kind of best buddy that you go drinking beer with on a Saturday night, and they'll think hard and go, oh, yeah, Jimmy. But the trouble is, if Jimmy goes off to Thailand, it's out of sight, out of mind completely. It's not a strongly bonded relationship in the way that a best friend forever is. And it tends to be very anonymous. So boys tend to go around in kind of slightly larger groups. So we showed this looking at Facebook profile pictures. If there's more than one person in it, and that one person is not your mum or your baby, by a obviously different generation, then if there's just two people, it's almost certainly a girl's Facebook page, and there's a 50-50 split between the second person being a boy, presumably boyfriend, husband, whatever. Well, probably not a long-standing husband. I suspect it might be the new husband, or another girl, and that girl is the best friend forever.
Yeah.
If there's more than two, if there's more than one person in a boy's profile picture, there will be four of them, not two, almost never two, and they'll be doing an activity. So they'll all be sitting, that classic picture above Machu Picchu. So they'll all be sitting there looking down over Machu Picchu saying, look, we've made it. Or they'll be climbing a mountain somewhere, or they'll be canoeing on a lake, or they'll be doing, playing five-a-side soccer or something like that, and crammed in the goal mouth. There'll be some activity involved, or just sitting around a table in a pub, with the beer glasses raised. There's some activity that's actually involved. And that bears on the fact that if you look at the dynamics of relationships, the thing that, and again, we've shown this with our research, the thing that best predicts the stability of any relationship, any friendship for a girl is investing more heavily in conversation, making the effort to meet up and talk. Conversation has zero effect on boys, the stability of boys. Friendships, absolutely zero. It flatlines completely. What makes the difference for them is banging heads together, doing some activity. And that activity is almost always done in silence, or at least, if you're going to talk at all, clearly boys do talk sometimes, surprisingly, it's almost entirely devoted to just making other people laugh. There's no serious content, right? And it's in the laughter, the communal laughter, that then the bonding emerges. Whereas for girls, the bonding is coming out of the sharing of emotional experiences. And I remember we were alerted to it. I never thought about it before. We had a project on mobile phone use, and one of our kind of advisors who used to come over was Holly Arrow from up there in Oregon or Washington State, somewhere like that. Can't remember now. And she once said at one meeting, if a bunch of people go out to build a hospital or a school or something in the Amazon, or dig up some ancient ruins somewhere. And one of these big projects where lots and lots of volunteers go. She said all the women will know everybody's name by the end of the first day, and by the end of the first week, they'll know everybody's life history, how many kids they've got. What. She said by the end of the month, when you all pack up and go home, most of the men won't even know everybody's name. That difference is so stark. Once you realize it, you kind of go, oh yeah, you look around all the time, you come across this. This is the point really Joyce Benenson at Harvard has been battling away to make and show experimentally with some very nice experiments. So the bottom line here is just two different ways of organizing the social world. One isn't better than the other. They're just designed to get to the same endpoint, but via different routes, because the routes they have to go through for the two sexes seem to be very different in important ways.
Right.
One of those has to be, I'm sure, we're thinking about, how small-scale ethnographic societies are organized, but the one thing that stands out for boys is they have to be able to bond as a group, because they are the defense, as the warrior. At some stage in life, the warrior grade,
right,
when they get into puberty, they have to be able to stand together and protect the group. And, the last thing you want is, when the guy next to you gets speared, fall apart emotionally and go, oh, Jimmy,
right.
you just go, oh, stupid idiot, why did you stand there? Which is a boy's typical response to these things, and carry on fighting, whereas girls are doing something very different. And I suspect a lot of I don't think have a satisfactory explanation for why girls should have this phenomenon of a best friend forever. But my guess is it has something to do with the fact that typically the girls are moving between groups on marriage, and that means they're living in a group where everybody is related to the husband, if we can give them that formal title, and they're on their own, and therefore they need, not only for the whole process of pregnancy and childbirth, support from somebody who knows how these things work, and which clearly men don't. And also, sort of somebody who can provide the emotional support in a context where, everybody else, whatever happens, everybody else is on the side of this bloke that you've ended up being married to or shacked up with.
Right.
And you just need so. And since all the girls are in this same situation, they've all moved into a group from the neighboring group. They're an obvious choice because they're in the same boat as you, and shared boats in that sense is a major source of all bonding processes. This is what we call the 7 pillars of friendship. That there are sort of 7 pillars, like 7 dimensions of friendship as to what makes a particularly good friend. And it's about essentially shared experiences and shared histories and shared cultural interests. So these are all cultural things.
Well, it's so interesting because one of the things that came to my mind, I must be an outlier. I think I'm an outlier. I terminated my best friend forever relationships. I terminated that many years ago for legitimate reasons, right? But I had that best friend forever, someone who knew my story, right, from 5 years old.
Yep.
But got rid of her because it was no longer,
appropriate.
It was just no longer adding value. Actually, it was detracting value. So, but in the field, so what you were saying about men, it's so fascinating. Okay. I think there was a paper, because I remember using it in my book. It might have been published in Science, that showed men and women use the same number of words, but they talk about vastly different things. And if you've ever watched, at least in the United States, a sports roundtable discussion bored to tears. And I think this must be how men feel when they listen to us talk about the things we talk about, bored to
Yep.
tears.
Yep.
And and you're just like, how can you repeat yourself over and over and over again? And I think this is also the experience that many men might have in conversation with a woman. And I'm not disparaging women. I'm not disparaging men. I firmly believe there are real differences in how we navigate social
Yep.
life,
Yep.
romantic life, professional life. And when I'm in the forest, all of these trackers are, most of them are Bachiga, but often coming also even from more recently, historically hunter gatherer,
Right.
communities. And I never discuss anything of any emotional value. I'm cracking jokes, like ridiculous jokes. And it's such a huge compliment for me when they're like, professor, you make us laugh. You're so funny.
Yes.
Right. And
Yep.
when something tragic happens, or if you communicate a really emotionally charged piece of information, not even about yourself, but it could be about yourself or someone else, they laugh. Like,
Yes.
and
Yep.
as a Westerner, to use that term, I don't even know if that's appropriate anymore. But as someone not from that culture, I found it incredibly offensive. Right, immediately, I was like, "Why are you laughing? There's nothing
Yeah.
funny about this." And then they get confused, and I then realized it's just a like I don't it might even be an involuntary sort of I don't know what the reasoning is, right? But they don't realize that they're laughing. Because when you say, why are you laughing? Or maybe they do, but when you ask, why are you laughing? Was that funny? They're like, no, it wasn't funny. Like, then why did you laugh? It seems so incongruent to the content. And they'll
Well,
laugh at someone else being injured. They'll
yeah.
laugh at an
Yes.
image, a gruesome image.
Yes. Yes.
They've
Yes.
and I have never been able to get used to this response.
Yeah. But I think this is a generic boys response because you see it even if you got a bunch of guys out on a beer bust or something like that, I mean, a lot of the time, I mean, this is what's often referred to as banter disparagingly, right? But actually what it is boys just trying to make each other laugh, and they will laugh at what to girls appear to be extremely cruel things. So they will do things to each other or tell jokes against each other, and kind of diss each other, if you like, in a way which girls find, just terrible. I mean, why would you treat your best friends this way? The answer is, well, it just makes them laugh, and it's part of the kind of game. And I mean, of course, you can only do that with your bunch of guys that you hang out with regularly. I mean, if you tried to do that with a bunch of guys from the gang down the road, you'd be in deep, deep, deep trouble.
Yes.
So it's very it's not a generic thing. It's very specific to the way boys bond.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I mean, it is. Sort of it's kind of foreign territory for girls, and likewise, what girls want to talk about very often is foreign territory for boys, and they just don't find it terribly interesting. It's
Yeah.
and it just, I mean, the differences are quite stark. This is very peculiar to the social domain. It doesn't affect other, parts of our psychology and stuff. But in the social domain, you do have these differences. And I remember this being drawn to my attention by one of the social linguists, a woman social linguist, many, many years ago, how different conversational styles are between men and women. Women's conversational styles are very much like kind of Seventh-day Adventist religious services, in the sense that there is a lot of repeating of what the speaker is saying, and an awful lot of what they call back channel. So these are, interjections which are very supportive. Oh yes, I know what you mean. Hallelujah. And you can just see where
Right.
the
Exactly.
Pentecostalist kind of style of service comes from. and men don't do that at all. They actually find it very rude if somebody interjects, and particularly this what seems to happen with girls' conversations is, as the speaker is about to give up the floor, we signal that with changes of tone and pitch and so on. And what happens at that point is everybody in the conversation says with the speaker what the speaker's last clause, because they're paying such close attention. They know exactly what she's going to say. Boys never ever do that, and they consider it extremely rude for you to interject into their speaking time. And it always struck us, this is kind of fascinating, but how on earth do the two sexes ever manage to stay together? I mean, just have a conversation together.
I have an idea. Don't talk to each other. That might be too difficult, to don't engage in conversation. Limited dialogue.
That is true. I mean, we actually did an observational study of this at one stage, just to see what happened. So watching what happened with young couples, as it were, because young couples talk to each other. Old couples don't talk to each other ever. Right, when they're out, but young couples do. So what happens, and what we showed very, very clearly is the girls adjust their speaking style to the boys. Mm-hmm. It's just easier, and that kind of reflects, I think, the fact that girls are much better skilled in the social domain. Boys are kind of wooden in that sense. No, I never said that.
Well, it's interesting is I've noticed that when a male is intent on securing you, they will devote a significant amount of time and energy to conversation. I've learned to just let them talk. This is probably like whatever they want to talk about. But I've been, it's always stands out. Like, why are we on the phone for an hour? Okay. Are you trying to make sure I'm not talking to other males? Right? I don't necessarily feel that it's a genuine interest in a blow by blow of my day thoughts or dreams, but more of a way of controlling access to me and then once they feel confident that, okay, she is mine, that trickles off to like, I shouldn't have to keep investing all of this time in conversation I didn't really want to have in the first place, but I did to make sure you felt attention, because we know as males, you love to talk. So we're doing it.
Better try it.
Let me just grit my teeth and get through it. But okay. I know we're bumping up on almost running out of time, but I really have I want to gossip for just a minute.
Okay.
Just want to gossip for a minute. I love that you've, in theory or in practice, maybe defended gossip in the sense of, I think it's important. We're tracking social interactions. Mm-hmm. This is incredibly important for our safety, for our success in whatever way you want to use success. Because we're trying to pay attention to who's defending who's in conflict, who has defected from something, and is human gossip a linguistic expression of that? And if it's so important, why do we morally condemn it?
The answer, I think, goes back to the origins of the word, because the word gossip is a corruption of the old Anglo-Saxon god sib, right? Meaning the peer group equivalent of your godparents. In other words, the people you hang out with, right? So what do you do with the people you hang out with? Well, one of the things is you certainly don't say horrid things about them. That's not conducive to having them stick around and waste their time, hanging over the yard fence with you, or whatever it is. At that point, it seems to me the content of communication, the content of the gossip, is irrelevant. I mean, it just doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be anything in particular, which is why famously the British always just talk about the weather. Everybody else discusses matters of great import. And what do we talk about? Well, we talk about the weather, how awful it is. Right? But it means you're, persuaded to hang in there and stick with me. And it's a declaration of interest. And I'm prepared to invest some time when I could be over there, cutting some trees down or plowing a field or something like that. I'm prepared to forego that benefit in order to engage with you. What seems to have happened, as is so often the case, I suppose, is anything in biology eventually, however valuable it is, somebody always finds or creates a downside for it. So that happens all the time. A little bit of salt is good for you, too much salt is bad for you, a little bit of oxygen is good for you, too much oxygen will kill you, etc., etc., etc. A little bit of meat is good for you, but as the many famous early explorers into the Midwest from the East Coast found, when the only thing they could see that they could eat that they recognized as edible was animals. And so they had a completely meat-based diet because they didn't know what plants to eat. All these Clark and all these early explorers, they were all dying of protein poisoning.
Really?
Yes, this is, good heavens, this is American folklore. Where have you been all this time? Anyway,
Not paying attention to the diet of men.
Clearly. So what seems to have happened in sometime around the 18th century, and they can track it back from how the term was being used in writing in letters and books and stuff. Sometime in the 18th century, the 1700s, into conversation came this pejorative sense of gossip that we tend to think of now, as sort of saying bad things about people, which of course you don't do when they're present. You always do behind their back. So I think it's, we've got stuck on that side of it, but I think that's a shame, really, because in the end, and I suppose that's always been there because it's a kind of offers an opportunity for policing in the background, but it doesn't override the fact that, most of what we spend our time talking about is relatively innocent social exchanges, social gossip, who you are, what you like, who I am, what I like, arranging social events, what are you doing Saturday night? Do you fancy seeing a film or whatever? All these kind of things that actually fill up 2/3 of our time. So in the surveys we've done, the studies actually collect observations of ongoing conversations, both in Britain and we've done them in Iran on Farsi speakers, so a completely different culture. And we've just published a big study of Polish data from corpus, big, massive, great corpus where you can count the actual words being used. Even it's not just listening and going, I think they're talking about, actually count the words. Something around 2/3 to 3/4 of all conversation time is social in this more positive sense. It's not pejorative at all. That accounts for a very, very small quantity, maybe 2% of that total 3/4 of social gossip. So, it's what makes the world go round. And as you say, it kind of keeps us in the loop. It helps us avoid making dreadful faux pas when we haven't seen two people fall out. Going up to one later and making some comment about their best friend or their best beloved, only to discover that actually, they're now the worst enemy ever.
Right. Well, and so I see gossiping as in that sense, as a way of information gathering.
Yes, exactly.
And it all depends on how you're engaged in it. And I don't know if other animals gossip in the sense that we think about gossiping. However, they do gather information.
Yes.
And I remember there was a study on dolphins. They have signature whistles. And I don't think the authors made a claim of gossiping, but what they noted was that dolphins used the signature whistle of other dolphins that weren't there. So it implied that they were somehow referring
Oh, wow.
to a dolphin that wasn't present. And I don't know, what they were saying, but the signature whistles have been identified as sort of the name of a
Right.
given
Right.
dolphin.
Right.
And yeah, they recorded the whistle of another name being uttered, if you will. I don't know what the proper term, emitted, when that particular dolphin was not present.
Sure.
What I don't know is, was it someone calling that individual? Because of course sound will travel farther, right?
Yes,
So
in
maybe
water.
they
Yeah.
weren't visible, but it was not a talking about them so much as a trying to communicate with them
Right.
for a longer distance. I don't know the answer to that.
Sure. Yeah.
But what I do think, if gossiping is a way of either maintaining or expanding social bonding, that kind of brings us to the final topic of social media. I got to be honest, I'm not very good at it. I find it exhausting. We didn't get to go into the nitty gritty of the Dunbar number, but it was sort of layered, right? 5 close, 10, whatever the next circle is, then expanding out.
Right.
And so this loose aggregation of 150 is really broken down depending on the level of interaction is
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
And so, for me, social media, the constant posting, the commenting, tracking conversations, it feels like I'm trying to maintain many more social ties than I can meaningfully
Yep.
contribute
Yep.
to. I struggle to contribute to the 5 that I have, on a regular basis.
Yep.
And so the research, though, is showing that even though people are more digitally connected, people also report feeling less socially connected or more socially isolated. So why do you think that is? Like, where does that come from?
In some, I mean, I think the the internet clearly has been very valuable in many different ways, socially as well as otherwise. But one of the things that seems to happen is that it does cause people to think they have more or access to more friends than they really do. In reality, the number of friends you have on Facebook, let's say, is almost identical to the size of your offline social network, as say the Dunbar number of 150. In fact, the best data set on that, which is the number of friends on 61 million Facebook pages. So thanks very much. You're probably in there, your contribution to science. The average was exactly 149, right? Yes, it's extraordinary. And it doesn't surprise me too much, because the problem, if you look at the structure of relationships on social media such as Facebook, and you look at the postings that go on, so the named postings, what you see is these circles exactly the same size. Not only the same size, but the frequency of contact is identical to the face-to-face frequencies of contact, right? But what Facebook allows you to do is to extend the number of people you have on your list out beyond the 150, which is the meaningful relationships you have, for some distance beyond. Well, actually, we do that anyway, right, in real life. So beyond the 150 meaningful relationships, friends and extended family, there is another layer that runs out to about 500 people, which are acquaintances, people we work with. The big difference is, yeah, we go and have a beer with them after work. We might spend a weekend away with them on some event or other, but we'd never invite them home. That's the test case, right? And you certainly wouldn't ask them for a favor, to lend you $100 or something like that. That's all that's done within the 150. And our natural social networks in real life, face-to-face life, extend out beyond that there's another layer about 1,500, and the final layer is at 5,000. Beyond 5,000, everybody is a stranger. You've never seen their face before if you're shown a picture on. So, all that Facebook is getting you to do is to extend the number of Facebook friends you have into these nether reaches of the outer solar system of unimportant relationships, and calling them all friends when in fact you know perfectly well that there's a distinction between close friends and these acquaintances out beyond the outer the outer layers of the social system. But that's because that's their business model. They want you to connect up so that they can sort of use that as for the dispersal of advertising and all these kinds of things that go on that pay their money. So I don't think we do anything different. It's just that we're in danger then of overload, because most of these less important relationships beyond 150, everybody from number 151 to 5,000 or 4,999, you the amount of time you devote to them is seconds per day on average, if that. So, even to stop them in the street and say, how are you? You're mortgaging half a year's contacts just to do that with those kind of less important people. Whereas online, on social media, you're getting their postings thrown at you, and you kind of go, actually, I don't need to see what you had for breakfast, really. I could do without it. Yes, show that to your best friend, but keep me out of the loop. So you do get, as a result of that, you get this sort of overwhelming sense, and that causes people to start cutting back and pulling out of groups and things like that, because it is just too much. You don't have time to handle that level of interest, and what time you have, you want to devote to your inner circle friends. So we devote 40% of our total available social time, which is something like 2 to 3 hours a day. 40% of that is given to the 5 people in our innermost circle of friends and family, what we call the shoulders to cry on circle. And you devote another 20%, so to the next 10 people in the next layer. So that sort of those 2 layers, which make up 15 people, get 60% of your total social time. They're the ones that are really important for you. And, you want to, you make them important by devoting time to them. If you spend your time to, sort of talking to, quote unquote, sort of vague acquaintances like your barista that you get your latte from every morning on your way to work, if you still go to work, you're taking time away from those important relationships, and they, if they're weakened, particularly friendships, not such a big problem for family relationships, but friendships are extremely sensitive to investment. If you stop investing, very, very quickly, within months, you can detect a cooling of the relationship.
Yes.
And you lose those good friendships at your peril, really, because it's costly to create new ones to fill the gap.
Wow, a lot came up for me on that, but I don't want to go all the way through. But one of the things that I thought was, wow, I'm supposed to devote that much time in a day to 15 people. I'm exhausted just hearing that. But I do think
to be fair, I mean, it's only, it's something like 20 minutes a day to each of the 5 really important people, which means once every 3 or 4 days you spend an evening with them.
Okay.
That's how you do it.
That feels better. It was feeling very overwhelming. But what I do think, or what also came up for me, was that the more people are engaged in the scrolling, it has a way of draining their ability to give that investment to maintaining the real world, real life relationships. And it also circled me right back to romantic love, because I think one of the things and we'll end on this, one of the things that I think is a big danger, if you will, for maintaining strong pair bonds is this relaxation into I no longer have to attend to or devote time to
Yeah.
this relationship because it's somehow secure.
Yes.
And it's not true for friendships. And ultimately, pair bonds, I think, should be like long-term ones, must be grounded in friendship. And that
Yes.
requires that level of attention, but we seem to think we don't have to. It's there, and it'll always be there. And now I can go and maintain these other
Yeah.
relationships that are, important, and I don't have to give it here.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's absolutely true, I think. And I think the reason probably we have this problem with romantic relationships is what they are is they are friendships to begin with, but they get converted into family relationships, but they're not family, right? And the key thing about family relationships is your family relationships you're kept in the loop by the fact that it's a network, which is very different. You don't get these kind of spider's web networks with friendships. You get little groups of friends, whereas the extended family are all interconnected. And you have this phenomenon of a kin keeper is usually a woman who kind of make it their business, not in a nosy sense, but make it their business to keep everybody in the loop, right? So they're the kind of information center. And, they make sure that information is flowing around the system. And that helps reduce the load for you. So your investment is much, much less, or can be much, much less with family relationships without destabilizing them. And then on top of that, you get what we call the kinship premium. There's something about family which kind of gets the heart aflutter, as it were, in that, if they turn up out of the blue at 4 a.m, you kind of invite them in and give them a cup of tea. Whereas if it was one of your less close friends, you'd kind of say, well, go home, I'll see you tomorrow. If there's just that little difference that of obligation and commitment to family, and we treat romantic partners at some point as though they've switched into that. And the problem is they don't have that family connection.
yeah.
That actually holds them in the loop. So you've still got to work at it, I'm afraid.
Well, there we go. I think this is the perfect place to end for all of those people out there who still are trying to pursue romantic love. You got to pay attention. Robin, this has been an incredible conversation. I'm so grateful that you gave me so much of your time. Your work continues to make an impact, and it's fascinating. And I know we could talk for hours and hours, but thank you so much for being on the show.
You're very welcome. Great fun, too.
If there's one thing that this conversation makes clear, it's that relationships don't sustain themselves just because they exist. Friendships are sensitive to time and attention, and that includes romantic bonds. They don't magically convert into permanent security, the kind we're used to with family. And even the people we assume will always be there still require investment. We like to think love is a feeling, but evolution suggests it's behavior. It's time spent, it's showing up, it's shared experience, it's attention. And maybe that's the real Valentine's reminder. Not grand gestures, not one day a year, not soulmate mythology, but asking yourself, who are the relationships I want to keep? And am I attending to them? Next time, we continue this conversation looking at primate social life with Dr. Joan Silk, whose research on long-term friendships and cooperation reveals something pretty powerful. Strong social bonds aren't always or aren't just sentimental. They're strategic and deeply consequential. Robin Dunbar helped us understand the architecture of human social networks. And Dr. Joan Silk's work helps us see how those bonds function in real time. Until then, check in with one of your 5, because the relationships you nurture today are the ones that will carry you tomorrow. Thanks for listening.